Ladies and gentlemen, I keep having some weird assertions from Marxists and, people in Britain or something. These people think that America got rich in the 1800s through slavery and then made slavery illegal in the Civil War in 1860 to 65, 61 to 65, to stop other people from catching up. So slavery was a way of getting ourselves really rich, and then we can just stay ahead of the rest of the world and coast nicely. That's a nice historical narrative if you don't have any gray matter between your ears, but let me straighten it out for those of you who do have some. Let's look at the enslaved population in the South. There was the regular rabble of poor white people who couldn't afford slaves. Let's put them off to the side for a moment. Let's take the rich, wealthy, industrialist people, industrious, I shouldn't say that, the rich and wealthy of the South, who own 80–90% of the wealth. And on the other hand, the slaves, who produce most of that wealth. Now, first of all, the person running the plantation does do something. They have to think and figure out what orders to give the slaves. Whether they're going to order the slaves to tear up this cotton this year, or to go ahead and pick it again when it comes to bloom. Should we tear it up and reseed, or should we move on to new land, or what should we do? So they have to do some basic thinking to get the plantation to run at all. And you can be sure that the better ones, the more ambitious ones, did a better job of running their farm. In fact, Thomas Jefferson was very nice to his slaves, and his slaves liked him. And he liked some of his slaves, didn't he? And that's like the only thing that some people know about Jefferson, is they owned slaves and slept with one of them. But the slaves on his plantation didn't have such a bad time as other slaves. Doesn't mean they are free or well off. I'm just saying there was differences. There were differences among the different plantations and slaveholders. It wasn't bloody whipping everywhere, nor was it niceness everywhere. There were some slave drivers who were cruel, vicious, and they tortured and killed slaves just because they had the power to. Just sheerly for that alone. So there's all sides of the spectrum. But I want to call attention to how hard the slaves work compared to a free man, how hard a free man would work, and how hard the slave drivers work compared to someone who owns his farm and doesn't have any slaves. Now, if you know anything about the South, then you probably know that there was a class of gentryism, the gentleman southerner. And they had huge, enormous colonial houses. If you've seen Gone with the Wind, you know that there's something of a hobnobby, gentleman sort of society in the upper class. These men did not put as much effort towards getting wealthy as their industrialist friends and brothers and so on up to the north in the other country where slavery was illegal, where a plant manager had to go to the plant and roll up his sleeves in order to get himself established until he can get a larger plant or whatever. Eventually he can get rich and be back from it, but he still has to go in and decide all the basic stuff, which machines to replace and upgrade and stuff like that. He's never going to be free of his efforts. But the gentleman farmer in the South can be very, very free of his efforts, especially if he gets a good overseer to run things. He can spend most of his time at the balls, dances, and whatever. So you've got a weird situation in the South where you've got people who want the wealth from the slaves, and they also want a comfortable lifestyle without a lot of hard labor and hard work. And that was just their culture. You wouldn't be surprised that it comes about. They look down at hard work and hard labor, because who does hard work and hard labor? Slaves. So they want to relax and be genteel. And on the other hand, you've got the slaves that are producing the wealth for all this to happen. And they are working as seldom as possible, as little as possible, as slowly as possible, and you have to whip them and beat them to get them to speed up sometimes. Some of them might have worked better than others, but by and large there was a picture of passive resistance in the South and in virtually all slave societies. The Romans had slaves that wrote poetry and taught school, but you know, they took over Greek culture, so that was a different situation for them. In the South, we had people, the blacks, were not even allowed to learn to read. And to say that we got rich off of people who are trying not to work, and these people are being overseen by other people who are trying not to work, right? So in the South, you've got people trying to get rich off of people who are trying not to work. And the people who are trying to get rich off of the slaves who are trying not to work, these people who are trying to get rich are also trying not to work. So you've got a whole culture of people avoiding work, working as little as possible or as slowly as they can, as minimal effort as they can get away with. And you wonder, why does the South lose the Civil War? There's one good reason for you right there. The idea that the South made America rich is bizarre. If you look the statistics up, and I've got them in my Civil War series, 17 video long series on Lincoln and the Civil War. 75 or 85, I think 85% of bank deposits were in the North. 97% of gun manufacturing was in the North. In the South, they had rules against steam trains or even steam engines. To have a steam engine at your foundry that can, you know, a steam engine that will drive a pounding hammer up and down and up and down, and you can shape steel with it. Instead of you swinging the damn hammer all day, you just put the steel in there and turn it and work it, because you got this machine to do it. Well, they had laws against those inside the city limits in a lot of places, because they didn't want the belching smoke, they didn't want the fire hazard, and they didn't want the noise. They didn't want steam trains going through or even close to their towns. They preferred the genteel countryside. They actually despised and turned down the wealth that was making prosperity possible in the North. The stuff that was making the North boom, the South said, we might have to, you know, have a nap this afternoon. We'd much rather we didn't have to listen to a train go through the town. I might need a nap. This was their attitude towards industry. Because of, as we just went over a minute ago, their attitude towards work is not much better than a slave's attitude towards work. You do what you have to do and no more. You do what you need to do to get by, and then you tell the slaves to finish the rest. And the slave does what he needs to do to get by without getting whipped or beaten. So, no, America did not get rich off of slavery. The part of America that had slavery was poorer than the other part. Not just a little bit poorer, massively poorer, massively less wealthy, on a gargantuan scale. And the people in the South who were in the underclass, who were poverty-stricken, had much, much less available to them. I mean, the people in the North worked in factories for pennies a day, but the people in the South didn't have factories to work in. They were absolutely screwed when it came to wealth and the industrialization of America and trains and stuff. The South was lagging behind sorely because of their attitude towards production and work. So, alright, let's rest it at that. The South did not make America rich. It dragged that part of America down. And slavery does not make anyone rich. On the contrary, it makes everybody poorer than they would have been had there been no slavery. Slavery costs money. Now, part 2 of this video series, which will probably be 2 videos long, will be, why did slavery endure so long?